a man's journey breaking the chains of slavery. The movie revolves around a black man named Peter who, along with his family, worked in cotton fields as slaves. One day he gets the news that he has been sold to a new master who lives far away. So he decides to spend the rest of his time with his family before his departure, as he praises the Lord. Suddenly his door bursts open, and two white men come barging in and order Peter to leave with them immediately. But his family gets upset, and they try to stop him, so he starts resisting the white men about leaving. When they threaten his wife with a gun, Peter decides to comply with white men for her sake. He and other slaves are transported via cages, and he notices his children running after his carriage with teary eyes. After watching his family in agony, he suddenly gets a new motivation and promises them he will return soon. After a long, tiring journey, Peter, along with other imprisoned slaves, reaches a place where a railway track is being constructed by slaves people forcefully. On their way, they notice hard conditions under their new master, as heads of enslaved people lie hanging from poles to scare others. When they reach the destination, they are ordered to leave the carriage with downward eyes, but Peter keeps a rebellious attitude and doesn't lower his gaze. However, he is forced to comply as they travel in a straight line toward their cage while new masters chain their hands. On their first day, they hear news of a runaway caught by cold-hearted masters. Additionally, he notices that new masters tame the slaves by using religion. They state verses of the Bible to prepare the slaves to follow their orders mindlessly. When a slave falls due to being sick, his master taunts him for faking illness to avoid work. But Peter takes a stand for him and demands medical attention. However, the white master threatens to kill Peter for disobeying him. Suddenly, a group of white men arrive with a runaway slave. They beat him up badly and then mark him with a hot iron rod. During his stay at the slavery camp, Peter notices that black men are not treated humanely. They are overburdened with work without rest, given no medical attention, and beaten up and killed for small mistakes. One night when Peter sits with fellow slaves in their cage, he tries to give them hope by stating that God is with them. But others mock him for manipulating them about God, as they no longer believe in God after these hardships. One day while a young boy serves food to his white masters, they beat him for distasteful food. As Peter intervenes to save the fellow, the white boss puts a gun on him. However, his senior vassal stops him as he feels curious about Peter for being different. While his fellows accept being treated badly and their slavery, Peter acts rebellious and fights for his rights. While working on railway tracks, he overhears the white men talk about Lincoln, who has set slaves free in his new law. And because of his support, black men throughout the country are running away to his camp in Baton Rouge. One night after watching a slave hanged, Peter and his fellows sit in their cage with heavy hearts. Vassal visits him, taunts Peter for being his new god, and calls him a dog. In response, Peter urges Vassal to feed him as nicely as his dogs, then Vassal leaves with a smile. In the next morning, Vassal threatens Peter with his hunting dog. However, Peter stands his ground and doesn't get scared. Later that day, Peter and his group of friends discuss the end of the Slavery Act by Lincoln and plan to run away to Baton Rouge. They are skeptical about the route full of swamps and animals, but Peter convinces them that living at a slavery camp is crueler than the journey. While discussing the distance to Baton Rouge, they find out it's 5 days away through the swamp. So Peter and a few others decide to run away soon with proper planning. A few days pass, and as they work on the railway track, one old man dies due to dehydration. So white bosses order Peter to throw his dead body in a pit. He reluctantly agrees and comes across many dead slaves rotting in the pit. This phenomenon enrages him, and suddenly he attacks the guards with his shovel. His group of friends notices this phenomenon, and they start the riot, causing chaos as the group runs away. Peter and his fellows take away guns and small knives on their way out for their protection. The guards take this matter seriously and start killing the runaways with bullets, while the bosses take their horses and dogs to chase the slaves. Meanwhile, Peter and his 3 fellows keep running and come across the swamp, but one fellow named Tomas gets scared of snakes and crocodiles in it and stops midway. Just as he stops, Vassal and his men capture him while their dogs eat his flesh. His screams scare Peter and others as they covered their ears in panic. Vassal offers Tomas a deal to pardon him. He must give them information about his fellows. As Tomas informs them about Baton Rouge, Fassel kills him instantly with his gun. The runaway slaves then decide to split up as a safe strategy against getting caught by their white masters. Peter starts running in one direction but soon realizes he is bleeding from his leg, and his blood gets on nearby leaves and grass. The white men chasing Peter with their dogs find his blood, and the dogs point out in his direction. Meanwhile, Peter comes across a house where a white man is having dinner with his family. So he drinks their water while hiding away and takes one of their clothes as a bandage for his wound. Suddenly, the little girl from the house spots him and begins to shout, so Peter has to run away for his life. On his way, he stops by, tends to his wound, and keeps running despite being tired and low on energy. After a while, Peter gets an idea and puts his blood-stained cloth on a tree to deceive the dogs. When he gets into a nearby swamp, he suddenly gets attacked by an alligator from behind, so he starts to fight it off with his knife. Eventually, he kills the alligator by stabbing it multiple times with his knife and crosses the swamp alive. As Peter exits the swamp, he rests on a tree branch and painfully takes leeches away from his body. Later, he makes a spear from a wooden branch to protect himself and uses it as his walking support. When the white men reach the swamp and find the dead alligator, they cut open its stomach to see if it has eaten any runaways. But afterward, they decide to spend the night in the jungle and cook the same alligator on fire for dinner. That night, Fassel tells a story about his childhood to his fellows. He states that in his childhood, his mother died, so a Negro woman took care of him. He considered her a friend until, one day, he asked his father to bring her to the dinner table. But his father showed his distaste and prevented her from joining them. When Fassel told his father about sneaking her some food secretly, his father got enraged. Later, his father killed that woman with a kitchen knife and explained to Fassel that these people want to overpower their masters. So after that day, he hates black people and can't tolerate them. Back home at the cotton fields, Peter's wife Dodine dreams about him being in trouble. But instead of getting worried, she assures her children that he is fine. She convinces them that Peter is a strong fellow who has effortlessly faced many hardships and will return soon for his family. Peter walks the whole night, and as the new day starts, he reaches another swamp. Due to his continuous journey, he feels tired, hungry, and dehydrated, so he starts getting hallucinations about his family. But he keeps praying to the Lord as he continues his escape journey. He uses his spear as support during crossing the swamp, and days turn into night, but Peter continues his journey. However, the white men consider the possibility that Peter might be dead by now. Meanwhile, Peter comes across an abandoned cottage and decides to enter it to rest. While at the cottage, he finds clean water hanging by the wall, so he drinks it and then comes across fresh coals, indicating recent fire activity. Peter rests there for a while, then puts his knife in hot coals to tend his wound. As it gets hot enough, he puts it on his wound and leaves. He spots honey in a nearby tree, so Peter climbs the tree branch with smoky coals placed in a pot to avoid the bees. When the honey bees fly away, he collects the honey and leaves. Upon reaching a nearby swamp, he finds a boat, but a snake on it scares him, so he puts away the snake, climbs the boat, and starts his journey. However, Fassel locates Peter's blood on the leaves and then the smoke from the tree and starts following him again. While back home, Peter's wife, Dodine, gets a warning notice from her master that she has been sold at a faraway place. As she protests to her master about wanting to stay here, he informs her that the new boss will get her a new husband, and she is not allowed to take her children with her, so for her family, she plans to avoid being transferred to a new place. At the end of the working day, she calls her daughter for help. She puts her arm in the cotton grinder machine, and blood oozes from her wounds as the owners rescue her. When Peter reaches the shore, he finds his fellow John hiding under trees. So Peter offers to massage onions on his body to prevent dogs from catching his smell. But John doesn't give much importance to Peter, and at night time, Fassel arrives there. He spots John on a tree branch and hits him with a bullet, and he falls to the ground. He then offers John to tell him about Peter, but John doesn't comply, so Fassel kills him mercilessly. Afterward, they cut and removed his head to take it to camp to scare other slaves. Peter watches the whole scene in horror from his secret hiding place and desperately cries. After waiting an hour, Peter gets out of hiding and feels horrified by John's death. So he keeps traveling continuously until he reaches a building on fire. He enters it desperately searching for food items since he has been traveling non-stop without any food supply. He eats hastily from the dinner table. Soon he hears a cry for help and comes across a little girl who is heavily injured. He tries to save her life by feeding her water, but she dies instantly due to her injuries. Faisal and his fellow arrive there, so Peter hits the fellow and runs away towards the grass in an escape attempt. As Faisal and his dog reach near him, Peter kills the dog with his gun and keeps running for his life. Soon he comes across Lincoln's army and falls to the ground with exhaustion. Suddenly, Faisal arrives there and tries to kill Peter. He repeats his statement about being a god since he can kill Peter instantly or spare his life. But some bullet from Lincoln's army kills Faisal, and Peter informs Faisal that he is not God. The army feeds him water, takes his basic information, and sends him to the hospital as his leg wound is heavily infected. They make him rest in the military rescue camp for a few days until he recovers. He notices nurses and doctors treating many black people in the camp. After a few days, he feels very excited to spot his friend Gordon, and with a heavy heart, he informs him about John's death. After his recovery, he and others are brought to the camp administrator, who collects data about Peter and his family. When Peter questions him about being a free person or not, the man replies that, legally, he is a runaway. To stay here, Peter must choose to either work on federal farms or join the military, which will eventually help Peter in getting back his family. At first, he feels reluctant to work for someone after being a slave for many years, but he soon realizes that the army post will help him rescue his family. Therefore, Peter decides to join the military training group. The officer tells him that his uniform will be given to him soon. But first, photographers take photographs of his scars, and he becomes famous for showing his wounds to the world during slavery. Afterward, the captain takes him to the military head of the camp, who at first ignores Peter, then questions him about his time as a slave. But when the army general spots his picture, he calls Peter's scars a form of disobedience and dismisses him without any argument. However, Peter stands his ground and explains that he is a fighter who has been beaten up, whipped, tied up, sold, thrown down a well, cut, and burned by his owners. Additionally, all the bones in his body have been broken during slavery, but his spirit cannot be broken. This speech by Peter impresses the officer as he promises to test Peter's fighting skills in war. On his way back, the captain announces that Peter will take part in the war from tomorrow. He then asks Peter for information about the railway slavery camp. As Peter fills out the information that slavery camps have organized military as well as big cannons for a fight. So they plan to fight bravely. However, his group faces severe loss at the start of their attack as many soldiers die from cannons and bullets. Peter soon realizes they must destroy the big cannons to win the war. He then takes charge of the group as the captain gets injured. He fights bravely and helps his fellows win the war despite hardships and injuries. They keep on winning the wars in slavery areas and destroy the homes of white masters. They snatch all the valuables, including cattle, and burn down the remaining stuff. As Peter has officially joined the army, he, along with others, conquers all the slavery camps, including the one where his family works. But when he arrives at his old house, he gets upset as he can't spot his family inside, so he prays to the Lord and soon spots them among the crowd. They stand among a group of black people who are overjoyed by the news of freedom. The film ends as he hugs his family and thanks God for listening to his prayers.